look briefly into the important role that family members can play in a person's recovery. And one little qualifier, when I say family, you can have family by birth, family by marriage, family by choice. And sometimes that choice is just as important as the birth and marriage family. So keep that in mind. We all can be supportive as a family member. Research consistently demonstrates that family members are a common reason that individuals engage in substance use or addiction treatment, and also that family support significantly enhances the recovery process for individuals with substance use disorders. Family involvement can improve treatment outcomes, reduce relapse rates, and promote sustained recovery. So today, I am really, truly honored to be up here with these amazing people. I'm going to let them introduce themselves, and then through a series of questions, they are going to share their hard-earned wisdom and insight. So if you'll grab the mic and start. We have teams, and they'll introduce themselves, and we'll go from there.
Good morning, my name is Zico Singleton. I'm a registered certified peer SUD education counselor. I'm also the co-coordinator for the harm reduction program here in Richmond at Health Brigade.
Good morning, I'm Zico's sister. My name is Zani Bradley. I work in finance. I've been in finance for 24 years. And I also just recently got my CPRS. Yep.
Good morning, I'm Linda Thomas. I'm a retired history teacher, but I'm really here this morning as Bennett's mom.
Good morning, I'm Bennett Thomas. I'm a person in recovery. I'm a CPRS and work as a lead recovery coach for the Master Center for Addiction Medicine.
Hi, I'm Ellen Long, and I'm a mother of 2 adult children that are in long-term recovery. Glad to be here.
Mike Long, the dad of the 2 long-term recovery youngsters. Been on this journey 8 or 9 years, 10 years. It's very much a roller coaster, but I feel like we're on the good end of it now, hopefully. And thank you.
And just a follow-up to the introduction, do you mind just real briefly explaining kind of how substance use and addiction crept into and affected your family and where you are in the journey? I think Mike and Ellen kind of explained that, but if you don't mind, you can start down at that end and we'll come back.
Okay. So we started the journey when our son and daughter, they're 15 months apart, were in high school at Godwin, and we didn't know what we didn't know then, but I came from a family of addiction, my father, and so when I left, I thought, I left all that behind and I kind of stuffed it away and never dealt with it. So when my children, who I thought were supposed to be perfect, started smoking marijuana and drinking, I just became full of fear, and it's like, this is not going to happen. I became the police, and it was just really, really hard. We became isolated from our friends, and so it just kind of crept in towards the end of high school. And then Holly, who just walked in, went to VCU, and she started having some episodes. Both of them kind of, more Holly at the time, I guess, had some psychosis going on. And anyway, just started the use, and it was becoming a problem. And I remember taking her to hear Tom Baynard speak, and I was like, oh, I hope she hears what he says. And then, so those seeds were planted, and then one day she walked into Rams in Recovery after a pretty long struggle and ended up graduating there from the program. But it was a tough road. It was a hard road because, you know, we thought we didn't have a problem. You know, our son went into a recovery and they said, what are you doing for your own recovery? And I said, well, I don't have a problem. Well, they said, well, you need to, you know, find your own support. So I started going to meetings and quickly, you know, understood that it was a family journey and that we needed to get our own help. So we, you know, started going to meetings. We started getting educated at North Star and got our support. And we just had to learn how to set healthy boundaries, which we didn't know how to do any of that, and learn that the boundaries were for us. And so just learning that it wasn't their fault, you know, because it's like, why can't they just stop? And then we just had to learn about the disease of addiction and understand that it was a process that didn't happen overnight and it wasn't going to be, you know, cured overnight. But through the process of learning, we have, you know, been on a healing journey. Our son is in recovery. He's coming back to Richmond. He has been in recovery houses for the last 8 years off and on. But we have, you know, continued to support recovery, and he's getting there now. So I think everybody has their different path, but getting educated was the best thing that we did in finding our own support.
I was a little slower on the education path. As a dad who, you know, when they started these activities in high school, I'm thinking, well, I did the same stuff, you know, so I was thinking it was maybe kind of just a phase. Then it became obvious it was more than a phase. And Ellen got into the education side faster than me, so my earliest education was kind of osmosis from kind of hearing what she was learning, and then started going to some groups and found a couple of groups I really liked that kind of connected with me, and then I kind of got all in at that point. But it's mainly because of Ellen that she sort of led us down the path in this journey, and it's been wonderful because I don't know if I would trade it, even though it was a lot of trauma. I learned a lot, and that's valuable.
Like I said, I'm Bennett. My story's pretty simple. Alcohol was my main jam, and you know, kind of started experimenting just kind of along with my peers and that sort of thing. Enjoyed it at first, and then the problems started creeping in. You know, I went to JMU. I dropped out of JMU. I took some time off. I went to VCU. I dropped out of VCU, and all along the way, kind of didn't realize that alcohol was the primary problem and attributed, you know, mental health, different resentments and that sort of thing as the source of my problems, and alcohol was kind of secondary. And as it progressed, it became more and more evident that alcohol was really my primary problem. And by the time I kind of came to that realization, turning the ship around, I underestimated how difficult it was to sort of turn the ship around, and became obsessed with the idea of, like, I just need to figure out a way to make this work, control it, manage it, and that sort of thing. And, you know, for me, I really had to run out of other options before I was ready for recovery. I had been evicted from an apartment. My job life was not going well. My financial life was not going well. And moved in with my parents, and you know, the sanitized version of that is that didn't go particularly well. And it was becoming apparent that I was going to have to go into treatment or find a new place to live, and I had no money, and my job wasn't going well, and I didn't have any other places to live. So I opted for treatment. Kind of unsure that it would really be effective, that it would work. I wasn't really sold on the idea that this is going to work. Fortunately, it stuck. I did inpatient treatment. I followed that with IOP. I moved into an Oxford house where I lived for a little over 3 years. I loved it there. I got plugged into the 12-step community. I kind of just dove into the recovery thing. My life is split into two, pre-recovery and post-recovery, and everything looks different afterwards. Got plugged in, I went back to school, finished my degree at VCU, got plugged in with Rams in recovery through that, and then that kind of set me on the PRS path that I'm still on today. There's a lot of details in between, but that's kind of the overarching story there.
So it's nice to know that our versions are pretty similar. Actually, our memories are pretty similar. Like Ellen, I'm the child of an alcoholic, and my dad, I'm pleased to say, at the age of 63, went into recovery and sustained it, and the remaining 24 years of his life were wonderful. And so, you know, I think with our story with Bennett, I always had that image of this is going to be okay eventually, and fortunately that's the way it has played out. But yeah, you would think I would have been a little more keyed into things, having that background. But it's different being a parent than being a child. You're protective of your children, and it is hard to tell that difference, like what's just normal teenage, young adults growing up and what's a problem. You know, what's being supportive and what's enabling. And I think we'll probably get into some of that later. But we did watch Bennett struggle and increasingly struggle. And because he was an adult at that point, he was in his 20s, we felt a little limited in how we could react, what we could do. And so there were a lot of years where I think we were probably pretty ineffective as far as being any kind of support. But we did realize, I would say 3 years before he went into recovery, that it was a problem, like a big problem. And then we go through this, you know, well, we think he's hit bottom. Well, no, now we really think he's hit bottom. And, you know, eventually he finally did, I think, had his back against the wall and chose to go in a productive direction. So I think that's our story.
Okay, so for me, I didn't know. I had no clue. My sister was always like this amazing, like, girl that I looked up to. And so I guess the way that I first found out was one of our mutual friends. We were just hanging out and talking, and he started mentioning using drugs or how he used drugs, and he said something about, yeah, me and your sister. And I said, no, she doesn't. And he played it off so well, and he was like, oh yeah, no, I'm wrong. So he tried to cover it up for her. And so, Kiki. And so I was like, yeah, no, not her. And after that, I kind of started watching her a little bit closer. I thought that I always did, but that was the beginning for me. And so she's gonna have to, I guess, really tell how she started and how she overcame it. But I like to think that I was the main reason for recovery. I had to have my appendix removed, And she had gotten in trouble, and she was like, "Mom, just save me. I'll take care of Zonnie while she recovers." And she did. And they gave me medicine. And she was like, "Zonnie, you've got to take the medicine for your pain." But I was like, no. I was so afraid of being addicted and all of that. So I would just take it like very, very rarely. But anyway, I think that I was the help for her recovery, and look at her today.
That's sweet. She remembers stuff that I have no idea what she's talking about. And I attribute that to years of using illicit substances. I just don't remember a lot. But it started a lot earlier for me. You know, I was really, really good at covering stuff up. Really good. Master manipulator. All the things. I think my introduction started when we moved to the States. We're military brats, and our parents are from Richmond. And started seeing things in the early 80s that didn't look like what we saw on military bases. And this is a whole nother panel, but you know, the introduction of crack into black communities, the Iran-Contra stuff, blah, blah, blah. That's a whole nother panel. Polar opposites of what we knew in Guam, right? And so these things started to permeate with me. And like with most women, it usually starts with a boyfriend or a husband. It started with a boyfriend for me. 1993, and so this was the beginning of prisons and taking my show on the road and being out of town, locked up. And it also ended in a prison. If anybody in here knows anything about Pamunkey Regional Jail, that can be the catalyst for change, you know? Really, even years of doing time in prisons, that 1 week in Pamunkey changed everything. I found myself one of the oldest people on the cell block. The younger women were calling me auntie. I was like, yeah, this has got to stop. I couldn't do it anymore. I couldn't do another commissary sheet. I couldn't make another collect call. I was raising my daughters through visitation, and my sister was bearing the onus and the brunt of that. And that 1 week changed everything. I was willing to let the help me, because if you know me, I am a know-it-all. I think I know everything. I will tell the help how to help me. And I had to totally get rid of all of that thinking. I had to delete a bunch of numbers out of my phone. I couldn't be as accessible as I was. And things had to change. So when my thinking changed, different things started to change. My relationship with my sister was back. We were estranged for a really long time. If you know Zico, you know Zonnie. People know who we are. And the fact that we had gone for so long and not speaking was breaking my parents' hearts. It was breaking my heart. And so she is a huge part of the reason why I decided to fully embrace recovery in whatever way that meant. This is my little sister. We don't play about each other. And so when she leaned into it, I did too, and she's been right here ever since.
Studies consistently show that substance use and addiction is one of the most stigmatized health conditions around, and that families with a loved one experiencing substance use issues or addiction also experience that judgment and shame and stigma too. So did you experience this? How and what were some of the consequences of that judgment, shame, and stigma?
Yes, I'm clean. I got clean out of spite. I use verbiage like clean. I began my recovery journey out of spite because, she's going back. And so the judgment and the stigma that comes with that, being a woman, being a mom, being a 27-time felon, that all of that came into play. And so, yeah, cultural stuff comes. Recovery isn't always fair and equitable. It just isn't. And so, we're going to have a real conversation about that one day, but I had to do what I had to do to overcome the stigma. And luckily, this time, because I tried it so many different times, this time it stuck. And it stuck along with Sarah Center and Rams in Recovery, 12-step fellowships. And so I overcame that stigma, and I speak about that a lot. I do, because I'm tired of sweeping it under the rug. I'm tired of glossing over it. I'm tired of the the we are the world type thing that we hear in basement churches, in meetings, when it's not always like that. Disproportionate sentencing. All of that comes into play for me, and I'm really, really vocal about that.
I think, I don't think we felt a lot of stigma, mostly because we sort of proactively protected ourselves from it by not sharing with very many people. As parents, I think, or I certainly felt like I wanted to protect Bennett from what people might think about him if they knew really what his situation was. And so it was really only our very closest friends, and typically our closest friends who also had children who were struggling, with whom we shared anything. So I think we didn't really feel it because we just didn't share it, which becomes, I think you mentioned, isolation. And I don't, it's a particular kind of isolation where people think they know what's going on with you, but they don't actually have any idea. And that's a lonely place to be. And fortunately, we did have a couple of good friends who unfortunately were in the same kind of situation with their family. I think a lot of what we felt was self-blame and self-shame, that somehow we had not really done our job as parents. And we don't really carry that with us, but we did feel it at the time. And there's still things I look back and think, if I had it to do again, I would do this differently. I don't know if it would have made a difference or not, but I would have done some things differently.
Yeah, we didn't talk about this beforehand, but we're sort of in line, I think. Because I remember I didn't, on a personal level, feel a whole lot of stigma. I felt more shame in my general lifestyle than the alcohol piece of things. But I can remember early on, like going to treatment, in treatment, kind of those first couple months or the month or so leading up to it, having a lot of conversations with you about like, I'm seeing this person today, what should I tell them? And trying to figure out like how we're gonna navigate that. And at the time, I really didn't want people gossiping about me. And like I said earlier, I wasn't so convinced that this recovery thing was gonna stick. And so what I didn't really want, I had reservations, right? What I didn't really want is if in another month I'm back to drinking, I didn't want everyone knowing that I'd tried, that I'd really tried and I had failed. Or not failed, but it hadn't stuck yet, right? And I think that's had kind of created a long-term situation now where there's like some people who know all the details and some don't, and kind of like, well, what does this person know? What don't they? And now it's been 10 years since my last drink or drug, and I'm very comfortable I'm very comfortable with my recovery status, much more so than I was when I was 1 month. But kind of that awkwardness of the like not everybody was in the loop at the time. But it's because I didn't want people gossiping. But
for me, I think a lot too, that I put a lot of judgment and shame on myself. And when I did, we did isolate from our friends a little bit. We were just trying to figure things out on our own. But I realized that as I began to get my own recovery and share with others, you know, there were so many others that were affected with the same addictions. And, but I would feel like with my friends, they were like, why are you still dealing with this? And some people I still don't really talk to about it because they just don't understand. But again, I would not trade it. Like Mike said, it has been such a wonderful healing journey. It wasn't easy at all. And I didn't realize how much shame our loved ones have for themselves going through this. You know, we're all human, and I really didn't understand. I thought it was, you know, all about me, all about, you know, why can't they just change? But again, as we changed, then they began to change. And we, you know, just tried to have loving conversations and meet them where they were, but it definitely didn't start out that way. It was a learning process for all of us.
Yeah, early on, Ellen and I might be out at a restaurant, and somebody we know, one of our kids, one of their friends' parents might be walking in. And before all this, you know, you would not even think twice about going up and talking to them. But during the early phases, I'd be a little bit like, you know, a little hesitant to talk to them. But as we got into recovery and going to groups and all, that began to kind of wear down, and I started being more open about it. And the final sort of what kicked me fully to become fully engaged publicly was one night about 5:30, I'm riding across the Willie Bridge and my phone rings. And it's Ellen. And she's like, how far are you from home? I said, I don't know, about 10 minutes. She says, well, when we get here, Channel 6 is here. What? They're here to interview us. So literally, I pull in my driveway, there's the big Channel 6 camera truck out in front of the house, and Tracy Sears and the cameraman are in my living room, and they're interviewing Ellen and I and Holly about our journey. And so at that point, I think, well, all of Richmond knows now, so let's just let it go. So, but actually, you know, what I found out was, there's been a few exceptions, but for the most part, almost everyone you share with has someone, a cousin, an uncle, a mom. I mean, you know, and it's amazing and kind of sad how prevalent this is. And so it's the fact that it's becoming more open and public now, it'll help so much more than, you know, it used to be sort of a stigma, but that's going away. And it's because of groups like this, obviously. So thank you.
When I first walked into this arena, I knew nothing about substance use or the local resources. And Google searches were not the answer. So when you realized there was an issue, did you struggle finding education and resources, and how did you ultimately figure this out?
The only thing that I can remember from when I realized I had an issue, and my mom being the ever-present, optimistic person who she is, she was like, I don't think so. I think you need some rest, and, you know, you just need to get back with your other friends or whatever. But I knew there was something going on with me. And so maybe that was my mom's denial at that time. The only thing that I really knew about was a place called Willow Oaks that I heard people talk about, and these groups that used to meet in churches, and they had coffee, and so, Narcotics Anonymous. And so I went to my first meeting. I was about 19. I was the youngest person in there. You didn't even know about that? On Decatur Street. And I went in there, and it resonated with me so deeply, but what I know now, at the time, I wasn't ready. but the resources were so few then. You know, Richmond is full of recovery capital now. Like we're flush with it. And at the time when I was asking for help and in my really, really limited way, I didn't get what I needed. And so I'm really, really proud of the way Richmond has embraced recovery. It's cool to not drink all the time, right? You know, it's cool to do these dry Januaries. It's cool to really do some introspective work on yourself. You know, Richmond is the first inclusive recovery city in North America, right? So we have some IRC people in here. I'm on the IRC board. I'm so proud of that. You know, the resources were very few and far for me. And I think that most of us in this room, if you work in the field, you know, we go really, really hard to make sure that people have all of these avenues open to them. You know, recovery is not a linear process. We know that. You know, what Dana's recovery looks like certainly doesn't look the same for me. And Dana is one of my very early supporters, you know, when I was still in active use. And so I think we go really, really hard to make sure that we can find something that works for this person, because each person is the individual expert in their lives, you know. And this is where I had so many, I'm gonna say, disagreements with clinicians. You know, these things just didn't work for me. They didn't speak to me. They didn't resonate with me. And luckily this time something clicked.
I think that as far as the help that I could have done to support my sister is I wasn't really educated on addiction. Now I know so much more, but early on I would just talk to her. And I think with all of the new stuff that they're now putting in the drugs, when she was still actively using, I would say stuff to her like, you know, horse tranquilizers are in these drugs now, you know, and just things that I would hear. And I'm like, surely when I tell her these things, she's gonna stop because people are dying. And so I was just going off of things that I would hear. Now that I have so much more education, and I, you know, if I hear coworkers or friends of mine and they're fed up, I try to educate them, because now I know that it's also a disease and it's so much more to it. So I take all of my peer research and all of the things that I've learned while getting my peer stuff down pat, and I share it all the time, because there's still so many people that are really naive, and it takes more than love once you're addicted. Once your family is addicted, because sometimes you fall out of love with your family, and then you have to just use your human piece and say, this is a human being, and I still have to do everything that I can to support and try and educate as much as I can. Because I fell out of love with my sister, so long ago, and I caught myself speaking ugly to her before, but then I had to check myself, because if I can be pleasant to strangers, surely I have to be respectful to my mom and my dad's daughter. And so when you no longer love them, you still have to respect them as human beings, and that's the piece that you just have to, that's the piece for me that I use to try and educate and help people when I hear about them using drugs today.
So I'll let Bennett speak to as far as how he found support. For me, going back to the 90s, when my dad was approaching kind of the crisis point in his addiction, I sought out some counseling for myself. I just wanted advice for how to try to reach out to him. And that was helpful. There was a book that I read at the time, I don't know if it's still even in print, called I'll Quit Tomorrow, that taught me a lot about the impact of alcohol on the brain. and on just thinking in general. And so when we were trying to help Bennett, I still had what I had learned during that period. I pulled that book back out. I did not actively seek the way y'all did support for myself or for my husband. I went to one Al-Anon meeting, and it was the wrong meeting for me, and that's probably a mistake I made, and I would encourage everybody, you know, if you try one thing and it doesn't work, try another thing. Like, don't just write the whole thing off. And I did kind of write the whole thing off. And that would have probably been a helpful resource that I didn't take advantage of. But, you know, I think that's what we did for ourselves, and I'll kind of let Bennett talk about himself.
Okay, so yeah, I was familiar with like 12-step and that sort of thing. I worked in bars and restaurants, and I had an old friend that started coming in at some point, drinking coffee and smoking cigarettes with other men drinking coffee and smoking cigarettes, and he was actually the first person I ever actively reached out to. It was years before I actually got sober, but he was the first person I actively reached out to. Because I knew something had changed in his life, right? You know, as far as treatment options and that sort of stuff, when the time came, I think where we were at with my parents was I needed to kind of figure some of that out on my own. I needed to have some buy-in. And there was sort of the hilarity, in hindsight, the hilarity of me trying to figure out what my next steps were, kind of in game addiction. I remember a phone call with the treatment center I ended up going to, where I called them and, you know, was asking questions, kind of inquiring what they were all about, and their response was something like, yes, I believe we spoke about 15 minutes ago. And I was like, okay, great. What did we say? That was a messy process. And then I learned a lot in treatment. That was the most helpful thing for me about learning just kind of some of the science behind things and some of the resources available, and just sort of gave me the time and the space and the access to the information that I needed to learn more.
For me, I had to, I guess the first time I ever spoke with one of my neighbors that was in recovery, she invited Holly and I to an AA meeting, and I really felt such empathy being there. It was an open meeting, and just hearing people there share, it was just such an eye-opener for how they were feeling, and so I just felt that empathy. And then Ray, in high school, when we saw that it was becoming a problem with his smoking, we got him into an intensive outpatient program, and on Wednesdays the families came, and the first thing was, oh, well, he's better now. So I was talking to the therapist, and I was like, oh, everything's going great. She goes, honey, you better put your seatbelt on. So, oh, okay. So, and then I would go to those meetings with them, with the families were invited on Wednesdays, and we did an exercise where we would trade loved ones. So I was talking to another loved one, and someone else was talking to my loved one, and I had more empathy for the other person. You know, I had such high expectations for my own children. So I had that feeling again in that meeting of feeling that empathy and compassion for the people that were going through that. I mean, there were people in there that were, you know, nurses where they had been sent there because they, you know, had a problem. And I was like, and one lady said, you know, she had never had a drink before in her 50s and had a drink, and it, you know, it became an addiction. So I just had that feeling of wow. So I went to some meetings. I met some people through one of the recovery houses where Ray was at the time, and I found my people. I ended up getting into a group and getting educated and becoming a facilitator at one of the groups called Loving Someone with a Substance Use Disorder. So I was surrounded by people like me, and there was no judgment. And I just, it was like I would just love, I just love being around these people. And so just growing as a community and now being at the meetings when someone comes in and they just have no clue and they're just in shock, and like we were, that we can just listen and, they can learn, and, and you just watch the miracles, because I had to do a lot of changing myself. I had to find my own peace because I wasn't helping my children by the way I was acting. So anyway, just signing up for programs, like you said, reading books, getting the education. Just took the course, Invitation to Change, which even, there's just so much more to learn. So thank you.
Early on, I remember going to the first few kind of parent or sibling type meetings, and a big topic was enabling. And people talking about, what they were doing to not enable. And I'm kind of sitting there going, I don't really want my child sleeping on the street or not being able to eat, not really realizing that the money or other, what I was giving my kids was just going to the worst thing, the very thing I'm trying to prevent. And it took a little while to learn that. So about the fourth meeting, I raised my hand and said, what if your children call you up not looking for money, but say they're ready for treatment and they really feel sincere about it? And everyone in that room went, oh, we do it tomorrow. We do it right now. We get them on a plane now. And that sort of reset my thinking to going, I see now, that the energy we put into this needs to try to get them on a path to recovery and stay on the path. So it takes it took me a little, maybe a few months to kind of, for that light bulb to go on. But like Ellen said, we went to a lot of different meetings and we kind of found our people, and made probably some of the best friends of all, sharing this journey with them. So I think the overriding thing that I've seen, both in the family and the individual persons with SUD, is community. It seems to be more success when people are able to surround themselves with supportive people going through the same struggle. That really seems important. Isolation continues the problem. That's all.
So we're going to switch topics a little bit and talk about early recovery. Yesterday we had a session. Bentley Wood talked about post-acute withdrawal syndrome. And so I'd like to hear how you each would define early recovery, and what were your biggest challenges during that time, and what's the best advice you got about early recovery that you would now give?
My advice now, looking back, if I could do it over again, I would have learned more about what they were going through with that post-acute withdrawal syndrome, because I had no clue how strong the cravings and what their brain is going through and how long it takes the brain to heal. And I just didn't really know what I didn't know, and just learning more. If I could, have learned sooner, I would have had more empathy at the time for what they were going through, and try to meet them exactly where they are and have those loving conversations, but set the healthy boundaries so that they can find their own way and learn to, figure it out on their own and solve their own problems, not try to do it for them, because I was a fixer.
Oh, yeah, early recovery is sort of, I try to take it one day at a time. I'm, no matter how far down the road I go, the ditch is the same distance, right? But I will say, like, the first 6 months or so were kind of unique. but probably the most important advice I got that I tried to follow is just every decision, especially in the beginning, every single decision I made, it's like I had to ask myself, is this getting me closer to a drink or further away? It's just every decision I had to make, I had to put recovery as the number one most important thing and not worry about getting the job I wanted, having the clothes I wanted, not worry about dating, not worry about the fact that I was sharing a bedroom in the basement of a recovery house. And just don't worry about any of that, because that sharing the basement room in a recovery house helped keep me sober. And that low-level job that I was working with high schoolers helped keep me sober because it was low stress, right? And just every decision in the beginning had to be like, is this helping me keep sober? Is this moving me closer to a drink? And that's, I took that advice, and I think that's was important for me.
Yeah, I don't have much to add to that, except during those early months, I think we just tried to stay as plugged in as we could. I mean, at that point, Bennett was living out of town. He was in what seemed to be a great program for him. He was doing great. But we just decided at that point we needed to stay as plugged in as we could. So, you know, we checked in pretty often by phone and went to visit, you know, as often as you would have us. And, you know, I think that's the main thing that we tried to do, was just let him know that we were there.
I think for me, what I would do more of that I didn't do before is to give more encouragement and let her know how much I am proud of her as much as I could. I would always look at her for words or movement or activity, like, is she high right now? Because sometimes I just didn't know. I didn't know if this was gonna be the time. And I can remember so vividly today, like, yeah, that was it. But I would always say, why are you talking like that? Or why are you, you know, just give her more kudos and accolades for what I saw her doing, because you were putting in the work every day. She would get on my nerves a lot because she always wanted cookout milkshakes, and I would be like, she is so entitled. She always wants this, but I would do it a million times again if that's all she needed to feel good. You know, give her back that, you know, regular girl stuff. We call it being regular or being high. Is she regular right now? And so she's been regular for a long time now. So I would just, you know, boost her up a whole lot more. I did okay, I guess, but you know, if I had to do it again, that's what I would do. I would just give her so much more go girls, you know, a lot more of those.
I don't blame her, because I was a mess. I was stealing the cars, and I was, you know, the checkbooks and stuff. So they had every reason to side eye me. But the early recovery for me meant absolutely one day at a time, and sometimes 1 minute at a time, you know, 1 30-minute increment at a time. My whole life, my family has always put us all the way up here. And so when I fell, my cousin Olympia right here, you should really be up on this panel with us too, because Olympia was my chauffeur, my motivator, my ATM, my all of that. I love you, I appreciate you. And so when I fell off of these pedestals, it would devastate me because I knew I broke their hearts again. And thankfully, Olympia, I'm using her nickname, Olympia had to be the mediator sometimes for my sister and my mom. This is my mom's first cousin. And you used to have to break it down like, hey, she's gonna be like this for a minute, but then she's gonna do this and do this. And you had to pour that back into me. And so the first, 90 days of being abstinent, I started writing stuff down. I like to write. I need Post-its, I need journals, and I had to make really tangible and practical goals, right? You know, it wasn't, I didn't have these grand goals. I just had, you know, make it to 7 days, you know, fill out 5 job applications, go back to Reynolds and see what the course offerings are. You know, I had to do things like that. And at the end of the 90 days, everything I had written down was checked off. That was early recovery for me. Early recovery for me meant working at a really crappy job at a restaurant and being maybe like one of 2 people in there who was in recovery, and watching drug deals go on all day long at the station right next to you, you know, in the same neighborhood I used to use in. And so once I got through a shift and would get on the bus and would just be tired and exhausted, I'd never felt more fulfilled and more proud and more happy because I got through another day. And so early recovery was, I had to keep it simple. And I'm not a simple girl. I am a very dramatic and out loud and flashy girl. But early recovery for me meant going to work for very little money, for very high stress, in an open drug market, really, catching a bus home, showering and changing clothes and going to a meeting. That was early recovery for me, and I did that consistently. I was doing 4 and 5 meetings a day, and I just really, really had to keep it simple because, you know, the previous part of my life was anything but simple. And I learned that so many good things started happening. You know, this is where they say, you know, these spiritual awakenings start happening. I was having spiritual awakenings at the bus stop, and I'm like, oh, that makes a lot of sense. And I'm talking to people, and people notice my key tags, and we didn't know each other, but keep coming back, proud of you, you know, things like that. You know, the universe will show up for you when you need it, but you also have to meet these things where you are too.
So there's so many misconceptions, and there is stigma, and these all pervade the issues of substance use and addiction. We talked about how education and accurate information are crucial to understand a lot of things, such as the effects of substance use on the brain and the body and your behavior, and the treatment options that range from harm reduction to self-help and mutual aid groups and intensive inpatient and IOPs. And there may be underlying issues, co-occurring issues. And again, we've talked about the role of empathy and development for family members, you know, of their skills in dealing with their loved ones. So as we end, for each one of you, what's one topic that was very important to you or that gave you that aha moment about this that you'd like to share with everyone here today?
Humility. I really, 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 really had to humble myself. I realized that I had to take my ego out of the equation. I was not willing to listen to anything. And really, really leaning into it and you know, just the introspection that comes with humility, like taking a look at yourself. That was one of the hardest things in the world for me to do. They talk about character defects, and I'm like, I don't have any. Like, I like who I am. I'm smart, I'm cute, I'm funny, and you know. And I was also extremely, extremely hurt. And I realized that hurt stemmed from my parents' separation. And I realized this at 3 a.m. on a top bunk in Goochland, in the women's prison, you know. So this introspection had to start, and I had to look really, really deeply into myself. And I found myself in a place of extreme humility, which is, it's not easy to do, even for the person who's never lived with substance use issues. I think taking a really, really hard look at ourselves and doing this self-inventory is one of the most practical things that anybody can do if you're trying to achieve whatever goals. Recovery is the flyest thing you can do for yourself, right? It just is, whatever you're trying to recover from. And so for me, it started with humility, because I was not gonna tell you, because I didn't have any character defects. And then I found that I did, and I actively work on these things even today.
I think for myself, being a family member of a lot of family that may still be on substances or that have recovered, is just to educate myself as much as I'm able to, and to always do the work as far as I can go to help the next person. Just being a good person and continue to be a good human being in this universe, because once we do that and we show our patience and our gratefulness for where we stand, people that are not, that have not had the issue of drugs, it's our duty and it's our obligation to be the support and to educate ourselves as much as we possibly can. And I think that will help the world go up a much longer way. I don't know. I just want to be the person to support the change, because there are so many people that are still on drugs. Just get out there and be a good person in the community. Don't have an ugly heart. If you have an ugly heart, work on it. Learn ways to be better. We can all do good. We can all be patient. We need patience to help people who are actively using. And if they want the help, don't be judgmental. It's an everyday struggle as a human being when you see people doing things that are not so right, or in your eyes that don't look good. But if we continue to be good and work on ourselves, we can help the next person. So for myself, I just try to be a good peer, and I try to do my very best for the next man or the next woman and help in any way I can, because the universe doesn't supply me with the needs that I have just for myself. It's for me to help the next person. So I just work on myself every day to be better. That's it.
Well, I would certainly second all of that. I would add, for me as a mom, I had to get a hold of my fear, because it was fear that was really driving my reaction to a lot of what I was seeing right in front of my eyes. But I was so afraid for Bennett, and that fear, I think I wanted to shield his behavior. I didn't want people to think badly of him. I didn't want his sisters to run out of patience with him. I didn't want to drive by the intersection and see him holding the cardboard sign. I didn't want him to end up dead. And so that fear, I think, probably tipped me sometimes from being supportive into enabling, probably kept me from seeing things. I could see things clearly, but I was kind of mentally averting my eyes. And that was not helpful to him or to me. And so for me, I had to learn to get a hold of that and develop some trust.
One important thing for me was to be willing to do things like go to treatment, move into a recovery home, kind of do my life completely different. And like I mentioned, I wasn't convinced that this recovery thing was right for me, would stick or anything like that. And so kind of sticking with the family unit thing, I needed some help getting willing, which was like feeling the consequences of my own actions. And I wasn't ready to be homeless. So like going to treatment seemed better than homelessness at the time. So I was willing to at least give it a try. And that was my first willingness, kind of my first leap of faith, first getting willing. And my hand got forced a little bit. I didn't have, it was kind of the last house on the block for me. But then once I got a little bit willing, the door was cracked open, and I was able to kind of continue walking forward in that journey.
I think my aha moment was finding out that underneath all these substance use disorders usually is a mental illness. So for me to find out that both of my children had co-occurring disorders was a moment for me, because I know when Holly was at her 1-year celebration and had not had a substance in over a year, she had a little episode, and it was like, wow, I didn't know this was going on. And so anyway, just getting the right medication, the right treatment plan, and then being able to be kind of a mirror back with them to be able to, make notes if she was on a different medication. And I just remember one time when she started this new medication, it was like, wow, she has changed overnight. It was like, we went to the psychiatrist, like, wow, she walks different, she talks different, she acts. I mean, it was like, not that medication is a healing, for everything, but for getting on that right treatment plan was really made a huge difference.
It took me a while to kind of realize that fear will manifest more fear. And I'll give you an example. We put a tracking device in my son's car. Look at my phone, I'm like, what, why is he there? And so, and I'd spend a lot of time trying to manage. I'd spend an hour or two on the phone at work trying to figure out the next treatment place for him. Checked how many boxes could it check, and so early on it was a lot of, it was part detective, part manager, and that's tough to do. But as I went along, I finally sort of, I don't know if it was a moment, but I finally came to the realization that I got to give it to God, and that was probably the change. And more than any one single thing, just sort of letting go was the biggest part of what helped me. Thank you.
So this has just been amazing. Thank you so much for sharing. For each one of you in front of you, you see a little dish garden. And for me, it just reminds me of a quote that I love, and it's, with a garden, there's hope. And that quote to me kind of shows that the act of tending and nurturing a garden and plants symbolizes so many things: positive growth and renewal and optimism and the potential for transformation, just like each one of you have exhibited. So just like recovery and support for recovery, you are shining examples for us all. So thank you for planting seeds of hope today and throughout your lives.